right, in hypersensitivity type 3, again, we're talking about antibodies. And in hypersensitivity type 3, we get tissue damage due to immune complexes. And these complexes get deposited into the vessel walls. So these, basically this green and red thing, this is the complex. So the green things are antibodies. So this is antibodies. And they're bound to some antigen. And these little complexes, these little aggregations of antigen and antibodies that form together, where do they do this? Well, they do this within the blood system, so they float around the blood, and then they become deposited in the basement membranes of the vessels. So in the basement membrane. And that basically will initiate complement. So it initiates the complement cascade. Because remember, the complement cascade is just a bunch of plasma proteins. So we're in the blood, we're in plasma. So it initiates complement, and that will increase vascular permeability. Okay, so what happens? Well, these complexes start to float about. They get then into the interstitial fluids spaces, and then they attach to tissues. So here's this aggregate that's going to attach to the tissue. And then what happens? Well, we get recruitment of neutrophils. So neutrophils then come about, and they try to phagocytize the tissue. Okay? So they cannot consume the tissue, so they're filled with granules, so they degranulate. And when they degranulate when they can't phagocytize. And that leads to vasculitis. So they're degranulate, they're attached to the basement membrane. The complexes are going out into the interstitial space towards the tissues, and neutrophils are coming in. So it causes vasculitis. Vasculitis is just, inflammation of the vessel, and eventually leads to necrosis, or vascular necrosis. So this clump of antigen-antibody complex, the antigen-antibody complex, now that it's gone through, it's gotten into the interstitial space, then it goes towards the tissue, and it lodges into the tissue. And once it lodges into the tissue, of course, it causes inflammation. So this is common more common in the joints and the kidney. It's common there. And this leads to things like lupus and rheumatoid arthritis Okay, glomerulonephritis. Okay, so that's within the kidney. In lupus, the antibodies target DNA. And the B cells target the DNA and get activated, and then they start to make antibodies against the DNA. So once they're in the tissues, especially in, in lupus, it goes towards the DNA there. That's about the extent of it. So again, type 3 hypersensitivity, we're talking about these complexes of antibodies and antigens. Remember, that's here. That's the complex. And they start in the blood and attack the vessels. And then they go into the vessels become permeable, they go into the spaces and attach themselves to the tissues.